This is Believe in Buckeyes. I'm Bryant Brown, an All-American cornerback. We have a very special guest. We have the old school coach, and a guy that's been doing college football since hell before we was born, right? Tim? And Shannon Griffith
Yeah.
here. He's a inside guy covering the Indiana Hoosiers. He has his own podcast, Hoosiers Football Tailgate, and that's also part of our Believe network here. Coach, how you doing, man? How you feeling?
I'm doing good, young men, I should say. I'm the old timer in the room, but doing well, guys, and appreciate you having me.
It's good to have you. I really want to get right into it, Coach. Listen,
Oh, here we go.
Uh-oh. We fired up.
I think
fired up.
listen, Indiana has been the talk of everybody in college football because it's primarily the SEC because they're trying to pick someone to blame for their rankings. But I think our friends at Purdue as well are baffled about this year. Is there a lot of NIL money at Indiana, or like what if you were to pinpoint the reason for this year's success? What do you go to first?
Well, I think the first part of it is the fact that Coach Cignetti brought guys with him from James Madison. Now, he didn't do it in a way that you would say is an unethical way about doing it. Those guys made their commitment to him after the thing was all said and done, and they were well into the January recruitment aspect of things. So he brought some top guys from James Madison, Fisher, the linebacker, Walker, the other linebacker, and brought a core of guys with him that had success at James Madison, that was able to infuse that mentality into a locker room that wanted success and for whatever reason hadn't achieved it. You know, the previous year under Tom Allen, they lost like 6 one-score games. And that's the difference between winning and losing. As you guys know, that winning is hard. It's a very thin line as it pertains to how someone wins or loses. And you guys are accustomed to winning those one-score games, even during your guys' tenure there. And Indiana had run into that bandsaw of not getting over the hump. So Cignetti brought those guys who had a championship mentality, knew how to win, knew what it takes. You know, you can talk about winning all you want. At the end of the day, it does come down to an attitude and how you approach it from that standpoint. Number two, he was promised, that there would be enough NIL money that he would be able to have a competitive pot to go up against, most of the Big Ten within reason. I mean, to sit here and say they were going to go compete against Ohio State, Michigan, that would not be an accurate assessment. But they actually overachieved in that NIL money after they had hired him and what he was initially promised. It was actually more, and they were able to add to it. And so, I don't know what that number is, just like nobody really knows what a number is that people has to work with. But I think there's no question the rule changes in college football now that we've been, it's been a couple of years now. Everybody's learned to navigate, has definitely played a big part in the resurgence of Indiana. And I do think it will continue to be a equalizer on the field when you talk other teams throughout the country, where in your era, Ohio State tradition, going to have the top 4 class, going to have, Alabama top 4, Georgia top, all these guys that were doing it through high school recruiting. Now the game's totally changed. So now you're going to have schools that maybe are not as gifted in the recruiting aspect of it, but they can go pick up a kid or two that are really good players and now add them to the mix. And all of a sudden now they're instantaneously competitive against the top echelon of any league. So the guys that he's brought from JMU are legit players. Now, at the beginning of the year, there was a lot of question marks about the JMU players being able to hang with the Big Ten talent, and that was kind of the unknown at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, one thing I'd like to kind of shout out that, Washington got a new coach this year, right? They got a coach from, I think, Arizona State.
Arizona.
Michigan State got a new coach from Oregon State. None of those teams are 10-0, man. They brought a lot of guys with them as well. So when you're looking at Coach Cignetti and what he basically, I guess, teaches to his guys, I mean, what's the difference? Is it his bold personality that we get to see in the media, him talking smack, or how do you kind of pinpoint how he gets his team, I guess, ready to go each week and obviously successfully and go out there and win games?
Yeah, well, first, the Washington scenario, that was in January. So that new staff was fairly limited in what they could or couldn't do. Now, the guy at Michigan State, I don't know what the ramifications or what was the difference there, but Michigan State is going to be better in year 2 of his tenure than year 1. There's just, you can just see the talent on the field. Sig, I think it's just the way he talks about, he has a mentality and a belief system of how to do things that you hear him talk about a blueprint. You hear him talk about you stay in the moment. He's not a transactional coach. He's more about stacking days as opposed to worrying about, are we going to win a Big Ten championship? He doesn't buy into, okay, here's our goals. We're going to win the Big Ten. He figures that if you handle each and every week the way you're expected to, and you get better each and every day, on Saturdays, you've already played the game because your preparation on Sunday through Friday has already prepared you for success on Saturday. That's his mentality. And it's been one of those things that everyone that he's around, coaches included, he has this knack of the buy-in. The buy-in that coaches always talk about. So, does he make bold predictions, or did he come on the scene a little bit, ruffle some feathers? If you listen to him as to why he said the things that he has said, the Google Me comment, talking about Purdue and then Michigan, and then, of course, I won't mention the other school. He looks at it as being a little bit of entertainment. And the fact that when he took over the job at Indiana, he said, I took over a Big Ten job and there was gloom and doom all around me. Like, there was no, where is this coming from? I came here to win. I don't know about you guys, but I came here to win. I don't care where I'm at. I can win. And so that's where a little bit of boldness came across in that regard. And the Google Me comment, he had answered a question like 10 or 12 times on recruiting day about a scenario on why somebody would pick Indiana. And that's where he came up, well, I win, Google me. And if you do it, he's won. I mean, the guy has never had a losing season in coaching.
Yeah, you explained the Google Me comment, but there was another comment.
What I was trying to say is,
Michigan and Ohio State.
He just lumped everybody that in that comment. But if you listen to what he said afterwards, what he was trying to emphasize there was no disrespect. He's not that type of guy. But at the same time, he was trying to interject some enthusiasm into a fan base that, let's face it, they've had guys come in there before and not achieve what they set out to achieve. So he had to prove to himself that he wasn't taking a backseat to anybody, which he said in that instance on the court, and he was there to win. And he's got the resume and the backing to prove that he can win. Now, fortunate for him, he's won. And he's backed up a lot of those comments along the way. But I don't think that's never his personality. He's a more quiet, reserved guy than he is anything that he has outwardly said, I should say, in that regard. But hey,
I guess I got to take your word for that.
Well, you got to take my word for that.
He's a Deion Sanders of the Midwest. He's a Deion
Sanders of the Midwest.
But he didn't have the speed or the NFL backing at the time either. But one of his unique things is that he was with Nick Saban early on at Alabama, that won a national title. he recruited Ingram and some other these guys, and he got to see how Saban operated, and he absorbed everything he found, how Nick Saban ran a program. And he's one of those guys that absorbs whoever he's been around and, taking the good and said, if I ever get a chance to be a head coach, this is how I'm going to implement it in my program. And, he had a fairly long time to do that before he got to the point where he's at now.
Yeah, I think one thing I see when I watch Indiana, and I've gotten a chance this week to watch a lot more of Indiana football, and it feels like, specifically the defense, that they really execute the game plan really well. The players carry out exactly what they're trying to do. I always say, I watch college defenses, and I try to understand what the defense is trying to do. Sometimes it's hard because guys aren't in position. Guys aren't doing the right thing.
Right.
I get confused. Are they really trying to play cover four? Is this guy out of position? It seems like Indiana really does a good job from a disguising to whatever movement to, blitzing at the right time, really doing exactly what the coaches are trying to have them do. And it's a little bit surprising, I guess. And I know a core of those guys came from a core of those guys came from JMU. So they're used to the staff, they're used to everything. But it's a little bit surprising considering that it's a new coach, a new place. And there are some guys that came from other places, right? They had to, they have to collectively come together and execute. It feels like something that, you would have to build throughout a year, maybe year two, you continuing to, instill what you're trying to do. That defense, what do you credit the success for that defense?
Number one, I think Brian Haynes, who's their DC, young guy, he's a very aggressive in his mentality as a defensive coach. He's always looking to find ways to put pressure on an offense and not just kind of sit back and let an offense come to them. So that's number one. So his mentality of being a pressure-minded DC has rubbed off on the kids playing in all 11 positions. And what he likes to do is give them some flexibility and freedom in their alignments as long as they can get where they need to be in terms of their gap responsibility. So it's not uncommon to see a front that maybe you haven't seen before, on tape. And it's more or less the freedom of the kids on the field on what they do. So that has helped them immensely just from a mentality standpoint of being ultra aggressive. And then the fact that what they have done and how that may confuse guys up front that are expecting one thing but are seeing a different picture than maybe what they were shown during the week has caused hesitation. And as you know, once those things start adding up, then you get to second guessing. And I've seen a lot of offensive guys up front all of a sudden go from a team that wants to be proactive and, know what they're doing to all of a sudden becoming reactive as an offense. And that's a bad thing because that's when guys blow by you. And Kamara, who's one of their big time players, he is a beast in one-on-one situation. The CJ West kid who came from Kent State, he's a player. Carpenter, so they've been able to get pressure with 4 guys. Now, they'll bring 5, they'll bring 6. Sometimes they'll bring more than you have to block because he figures I'm going to get to you before you recognize it and get it off. So that has helped them immensely. But the one thing that I have thought is they do everything pretty darn good, including tackling, which blows my mind because they tackled one time full out in camp. Cignetti doesn't believe in full out tackling in camp or anything. So the only time that they're truly live tackling for the year is games. Well, they're one of the least teams of missed tackles that I've ever seen. And I know that Urban Meyer is a part of Big Noon Kickoff. And even if you watch some of his things on the Big Ten channel, he talks explicitly about how well of a coaching job that this Indiana staff has done in terms of fundamentally sound football. It's not rocket science. I mean, you put guys in the right place to make plays, then they make the play, and they're not missing tackles. and they haven't given up cheap scores, which is always the threat, that defenses try to guard against, is giving an offense cheap scores. So I think a lot of it has to do, the mentality of the DC is truly embraced by all 11 guys on the field, and they love playing for him. And when you get those two combinations in sync with the experience of the guys that came from JMU, you're hitting the ground running. You're not spending a lot of time on day one install stuff.
So when I watch Indiana's defense, to me, I wouldn't say so much weakness. I would say they seem to do really good on the rundowns, and they shut down the run. They put themselves in really good third down positions, right? And give themselves advantages. To me, I feel like if I'm Ohio State, I would be more aggressive with the pass early on. Even if I want to run, I'd be more aggressive to try to win those early downs. It seems like there's some opportunity in the pass, not necessarily deep, because I feel like, Indiana on defense, they seem to execute well. They seem to be in good position. Those defensive backs do a good job of staying on top of routes, but there seems like still a lot of space offensively in the pass game. So, from your perspective, from what you've seen, even versus when they play Michigan, what do you?
Well, here's the one thing I know: D'Angelo Pounds, one of their corners, is a legit guy.
Yeah,
he's a legit shutdown corner, right? When you have one of those guys and you can put them on somebody and say you take care of him, and then you take the other 10 against the next 10, and you take the quarterback out of it, you already got an advantage 10-9. But like any defense, I think what defense is, and this, is that when you can get an offense off schedule and behind the chains, it makes the game so much easier for a defense. So if I'm Ohio State, I want to have success on first and second down against Indiana, so that my third downs are in that 3rd and 5 to 3rd and 3 category. If they're off schedule and they're faced with 3rd and 9 or greater, I think it'll be a long day for them, because Indiana, that's when they start getting into some of their exotic stuff and really putting the hammer down on an offense. Passing game wise, I'm always, and I'm kind of like you, I hate the cheap score. When you throw it over the top of a defense and they give up a cheap 65-yard touchdown over the top, that's cheap. If you're going to score against me, at least make them earn it. And that's the one thing that I would say Indiana's defense has done for the most part, is made an offense earn their scores.
Yeah. Now, we've been talking a lot of Indiana defense, and to be honest, I'm sick of it. I'm tired of it. I'm an offensive guy. Coach, you're a former quarterback. You're an offensive guy. So let's talk about Indiana offense and all that they bring to the table. Obviously, we've been speaking about Kurtis Rourke and the outstanding season that he's having. He's kind of creeping up there on the Heisman list. I believe he's the number 1 rated quarterback in PFF in the nation due to his play. And I guess watching Indiana, obviously, it's more like a 2 attack with the running backs for what I see. But the wide receivers, to me, is kind of special, right? It's like almost 5 guys who have like very identical stats when it comes to yardage, identical receptions. What can you say about that Indiana offense and what Chris is bringing to them that makes them so dynamic, where, they're obviously Michigan won the best game, but for most of the season, never really taken it to guys?
Well, first, Kurtis was a 2022 MAC Player of the Year, and that tells you how good a quarterback he is, because a guy that does that in the MAC is a pretty darn good quarterback. He's from Canada, so not too many people knew about him. You know what I mean in that regard. I tell you what's made Indiana really good. Kurtis is really good in the run-pass option. That's where he has excelled tremendously and almost made defenses more wrong than they were right about anything. Nebraska was one of those teams, because they came in Indiana at that time. I think Nebraska, when they came to Indiana and played them, they were 5-2 overall. And their defense was one of the better rush defenses and pass defenses in the country. Kurtis Rourke made Tony Elliott look like a bad defensive coordinator that day, because everything that Tony Elliott threw from him at Nebraska was wrong, because most of it was run pass. So he's able to put defenses in conflict because of how he does that. And he does it really good. He's one of those guys that just has that ability. Wide receiver wise, I don't think they have a true quote unquote burner, but what they do have is a lot of guys that get open, and they're probably one of the best wide receiving groups I've ever seen block in the run game. They've done a really tremendous job blocking on the perimeter in the run game. So they've done a good job of targeting many different guys. So you can't say, I'm going to shut down Surratt. Well, then Williams is going to burn you, and vice versa, because that's the ability that they've gotten this year. And in some respects, I think Ohio State's the same way. You just can't say, I'm going to shut down this guy because the other guy that's, lighting it up is lighting it up. And, but the RPO game has been very good for Indiana. Kurtis Rourke being a 5th, 6th year type of guy back there. He's a veteran. He understands the game, and they put a lot on his shoulders, and he's done well with it, and a lot of confidence in that kid. He is a tremendous quarterback. And like you said, he's the number 1 ranked efficiency quarterback in the country. He's also the number 1 quarterback in the country versus pressure. He's like 80% versus, or 90% versus a pressure defense, according to PFF. And what that means is anytime a team puts pressure on him, blitzes him, he has more success than he does bad things happen to him. So those are dangerous things for a defensive coordinator. Said, how are we going to stop him? Because when you got that guy, it's scary. I mean, you guys have had those guys back in the pocket, with CJ and Justin Fields, and we can go down the list. It makes your job up front. And speaking of the offensive line, they lost Weaver a week ago. He was one of their starting left guards. The Thursday before Michigan, he blew out his Achilles. So Indiana had to substitute a brand new left guard in the game, Tyler Stevens, who had played sparingly. So they went into the game with only 4 of the 5 guys that they had played most of the year with. So there was probably some issues in that regard, just from a comfortability factor. I know that you guys, I saw the center.
Right. We live in that same life.
That same injury, and I hate to see that for any kid, especially a kid like your guy, because he's in line to be, I think he still will be the best center in the country, even though he transferred from Alabama, and the guy you're putting in there was the starter last year. So it's not like you're, picking up pieces off the ground. But anytime a guy that you're getting a lot of production out of that goes down with an injury, it hurts. It hurt. And that's what hurt Indiana mostly from Michigan. So the bye for Indiana came in at a huge point in time. And I do think they were a little heavy-legged in the second half against Michigan, especially up front, because all those guys had played every single game up to that time. And you just, from the pounding that you guys go through up front, I mean, for 5 guys to play week in, week out at a high level, it's hard.
So, Coach, this is what I expect from Ohio State's defense. I expect tight coverage, man-to-man coverage, run pass option, whatever. We're going to play these receivers man-to-man. We're going to pressure this quarterback. We're gonna throw a couple blitzes towards that left guard who's a little, is a little bit newer in there. And you mentioned, Rourke's been great against the pressure. He seems to always kind of get the ball out quick, even if he has to go through a couple progressions or whatever. But how do you, and I watched that second half of the Michigan game. It felt like Michigan played that way. Tighter coverage. If we're going to lose, they're just going to have to beat us one-on-ones. And we're going to try to get after the quarterback. We're going to jump some routes. Do you feel like Indiana has faced a team outside of that second half of Michigan that has really went with a approach of press, man-to-man, pressure, a little bit more exotic blitzes, similar to what Indiana would give another team? Washington?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's where Michigan's game plan came from.
Yeah.
That's what Washington tried to do. And now Washington did the same thing, and we hit some shots down the field. if you look in that second half against Michigan, if Surratt doesn't drop the 2 passes that he drops, it's probably not even a question, because one would have kept a drive going and the other one, it was been at the 2-yard line.
Right.
You know, he hadn't dropped a pass all year and he drops 2 in that game. So I mean, I don't think that's a unreasonable thought process from a defense. And I know Knowles is built that way. He's a pressure guy, you know, and he probably feels he's got the secondary to do it. And, you know, if you're throwing a bunch of 50-50 balls all game, your chances aren't great, right? You know, if you can bait an offense to throwing 50-50 balls all the time on the outside, there's a reason why they're called 50-50, right?
But it feels like Indiana's making them.
Yeah,
they've been on so many back shoulder fades. These percentages are starting to look like 60-40.
And you're right, because that's because of Kurtis. I mean, I don't want to sound as if I'm trying to shade any light on it, but the reason why Indiana has spooked a lot of pressure teams out of pressuring is because Rourke's ability to do the back shoulder throw. And as you know, as a DB, you can't defend a back shoulder throw. It's almost nearly impossible.
Hold on.
One-on-one.
Listen to all my defensive backs listening to this podcast. You can stop the back shoulder throw.
Yeah.
Just got to get to the hand. You got to get to the hands. You got to get to the hands. You may not get it on the first try. You may not get it on the second try. But at some point, he has to complete the throw, the catch all the way to the ground. Land on them, poke him in the eyes, pinch him, whatever you got to do to get that ball to pop out. That's what I teach my young corners, Coach.
Absolutely. I would not disagree with you. And you're right. You got to clutch, scrawl, and, whatever you got to do. But what makes Kurtis's back shoulder throw a little harder to defend, if you've watched it, it's not the subtle back shoulder throw. It's a total turn and the DB still running down the field back shoulder throw. Because Surratt and a lot of these receivers are good about selling it and then falling out of their route on the back shoulder. So they coach it upright, which makes it ultimately harder to defend. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that's the way we're going to beat Ohio State, but it does give coordinators a little bit gun shy when you're pressuring a guy and he's completing back shoulder throws because you can't stop it. Then they start getting out of stuff. I mean, that's what happened to Washington and in some cases, Nebraska. And we could sit here all day. You can compare us to whoever and I compare you to whoever, but we both know that it don't matter what somebody did against somebody else. It matters what happens between the white lines on Saturday and who makes more plays than the other team. When you get two really good teams playing against each other and it's going to be a back and forth type of game, it's turnovers and special teams that ultimately may decide the game, because each offense and each defense is good enough to kind of play chess and checkers against each other. And then it comes down to, oh, crap, we got a punt block. Or crap, we got a field goal block that went for 6. Or a guy returned a punt for a score. I think it goes back to Indiana has to have success on first and second down, just like Ohio State does. If they both can do that, they'll move the football. If one team struggles at doing that, it will be a long day for them.
Now, we know the ratings will play themselves out, right? Everything will kind of shape themselves out at the end. And, usually, we got the playoff system coming up, and 12 teams are getting in. So a lot more teams are getting their opportunity to play for a national championship at the end of the season. What's your opinion on, because we know brands matter, right? I mean, I ain't going to say it maybe it shouldn't sometimes, but we know how we've been watching, you've been college football much longer than I have. Brands kind of matter and things kind of go certain ways for certain teams due to name recognition to others.
Right.
If Indiana loses a game, they're one-loss team in the Big Ten. Do you think they still get in the playoffs over some of these, I'm going to say get right to it, some of these SEC schools who have 2 losses on their schedule? Do you think that the committee still would let the Hoosiers go on and compete for?
Yes, I do think Indiana makes the playoffs. Here's why. The teams that they have played against, all the teams that they've played against, especially the Power 4 teams, all either had a winning record or were 500 when Indiana played them, okay? So a lot of people are making this thing about, well, all the teams that Indiana played, their record sucks. Well, wait a minute. When Indiana played them, Nebraska was 5-2 and was kind of the darling of the Big Ten at that point in time. And Maryland was 3-1. And Maryland had just come off a season where they had won 9 games. You know what I mean? So when they played these teams, with one exception, Michigan, they still won, but they won by 5. Guys, they were blowing teams out. Their winning differential was like plus 31.
Yeah.
They never trailed a game until the first quarter against Michigan State, when they spotted Michigan State 10 points, and then came back to run off 47 straight. Now, if I took the I and the U off the helmet, painted a little gray, and put a big O on it, everybody would say they should be number 1. They're undefeated. Why isn't Ohio State number 1? They're undefeated. Well, right. But Indiana, who hasn't had the success or tradition that Ohio State is, and understand it's a different time from when it was you played, and even a few years ago when we were talking about recruiting in the element that those teams are formulated under, where it's high school recruiting. This is different now. So it's a totally different thing. And the Big Ten has expanded to 18 teams. So you're going to have these uncommon schedules throughout the Big Ten. Indiana just happened that they got 8 home games this year, and it worked to their advantage, and they took advantage of it. But yes, I do think they still get in. Now, they got to beat who's left on their schedule, even irregardless of what happens Saturday. We're still a long way from seeing whatever's going to happen with this ratings stuff. It's crazy. You know, it's a snapshot in time. If the season had ended on Tuesday, this is what would happen. And yes, there's going to be good teams left off the board, just like there was when there was 4 teams in the race. The Pat McAfee show was pointing out some of these statistics that I was even drawn back to, because somebody had drawn a conclusion that the only thing you have to evaluate Indiana and Ohio State on is 3 commonalities: Nebraska, Northwestern, Michigan State. You guys beat Nebraska by 5. Indiana beat them by like 40.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys scored on the last minutes of the fourth quarter to beat Ohio State at home. And we know that don't mean jack shit. It means what you did at the end of the day. It's called a W. It doesn't matter how bad you beat somebody, as long as you scored more points than they did, you win, right? But they were trying to draw some of these conclusions for some of these crazies out there that want to bang their chest and Indiana shouldn't be in because they're Indiana. Well, wait a minute. You can't do that. You got to evaluate for what it is. Just like I think, somebody was saying that, well, what happens if Indiana beats Ohio State and Ohio State has 2 losses? Well, they would have lost to the number 1 ranked team in the country and the number 5 ranked team in the country. Well, Tennessee and all these, Tennessee lost to Kentucky or something like that. And Arkansas, they lost to Arkansas, and Alabama lost to Vandy. I mean, so it does matter who you're playing against. Just because you play in the SEC doesn't give you, something over another conference. Indiana is benefited by the fact that there's an 18-team conference now. There are no divisions, and the fact that in this 18 conference, they got lucky in the way the schedule falled out, that they only had to play Michigan and Ohio State this year. And before the season, Michigan was ranked number 9 in the country.
The teams that went to the teams that went to the championship, basically, you have
Indiana's beat.
Yeah, you have Washington's coach to go leave and go to Alabama, and then they lose a bunch of guys, and you have Michigan's coach go to the NFL, and so you can't really even anticipate. If you look at the schedule last year, it looks like a whole different schedule.
But it's not Indiana's fault that those Washington and Michigan aren't playing to the level that everybody expects them to. That's just like saying Ohio State that. I can remember a schedule that Georgia had one year that was cupcakes, and everybody was like, well, they're Georgia.
Yeah,
no shit, but they had it easy. They should
Michigan last year, right? Other than the Ohio State game, I mean, I was looking at something like you said, comparison where Indiana, where they was basically making an argument. Indiana, if they wasn't Indiana, they'd be ranked higher. Michigan last year, like the point differential was similar, the record was similar, and like Michigan's like number 1 in the nation. While Indiana at the time, this was before they even got to 5, I think it was like 8 or 9 still at the time.
Right.
Just like
There's no question there is brand awareness, brand favoritism, or however you want to look at it. It's just like, here's the goat that gets me, Notre Dame. Okay. Now, I'm going to give Notre Dame, they won at Texas A&M. Okay. But they lost to NIU, who was a 500 team in the MAC, who just got beat last night at Miami of Ohio. Now, since the game against Texas A&M, from NIU on, they haven't played anybody.
Yeah.
But because they're Notre Dame and they get by playing a quote-unquote independent schedule, if they're in the top 12 or top 10, they automatically get in. I don't buy that. I think Notre Dame's got to be forced to join a league where they have to play somebody week in, week out, and not play Navy and Army every year. Now, Army may beat them Saturday. Army's 9-0, and they're pretty darn good with what they do. But Notre Dame, Notre Dame has always bothered me in this discussion.
Yeah.
And I'm an Indiana guy, so
I'm trying to run that state. No, you're trying to run the state.
I'm going to get lambasted by the Notre Dame fans like I did last year for making that comment. But yeah, there's brand awareness. There's nothing wrong with that. I get it. But it is what it is. And the only way you can handle stuff like that is handle your own business. Worry about yourself and not everybody else. That's kind of what SIG's approach is. You worry about who you are and what you are, and let the people that want to talk about it over there. You do your job on Saturday, just like every coach has told you and what you're telling your kids on Friday night. Same thing. Don't worry about what somebody's saying on Twitter. Don't worry about what somebody's saying on ESPN or Fox or whatever. If you're worried about those things, you're going to get your ass beat.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Bryant.
Now, last one, Coach. I'm gonna put you on the spot. Put you on the spot. Just letting you know right now. Putting you on the spot.
You're gonna ask me to predict the score.
I need a score. I need a score for Saturday. Obviously, it's not a night game for the 12 for 5.
Will you guys quit crying about a night game?
Hey, look, we trying to get this place shaking on you guys, man. We trying to rile it up, man.
It should be a night game.
You guys are going to get shaking, and whether it's a 9:00 in the morning game or 9:00 at night. I don't want to hear any more of this complaining about Bucky.
It's not the thing.
They just went a little bit longer to get juiced up. That's all they're worried about. Here's what I think. I don't think Indiana's a 13-point underdog to Ohio State. I think that's a little wide, but I don't know anything about Vegas. I'm going to say Indiana wins 30-27. I think both offenses are going to score, and I do think Indiana's going to find a way to win it late in the game. Now, I'm probably 1 in 40 about predicting any score. And if I looked at all the things that are against Indiana, like they've only beat Ohio State a couple times since 1988, and Ohio State's dominated them ever since the word go. I remember the game in 2020 in COVID where Indiana came up short 42-35 against Ohio State when Michael Penix was playing, and had the Buckeyes a little bit concerned in that ball.
Nervous. So, we were scared.
Here's what I do think. I will be surprised if one or the other team thoroughly dominates. It's no doubt. I think it's going to be a close game. I think it's going to be a 3 or 4 point differential, but I may be wrong. It may be a 14-point differential for all I know. But I'd be surprised if somebody's going to say we're going to win 30-7 or something to that extent. But
so what you're saying is take the points. You're saying take the points. Bet on Indiana. Bet online.
You give me 13 right now. I'd take the points.
Okay. So Bet Online is the world's most trusted source and betting platform.
Yeah. Well, here's the Bet Online.
Coaches are recommending money on Indiana. Take the points.
Take the points.
Take the points on the over. 51.5 on the over. Indiana, for the better part of the year, was always a 7 to 7.5 point favorite all through the season up until last week against Michigan. I guess Vegas started taking offense to the money that they were giving out to Indiana fans because Indiana was covering the spread quite thoroughly.
Yeah.
They were 15-point favorites against Michigan last week, which I thought was like crazy because I thought at best maybe 10. So, but hey, I may be wrong, and I'm not even going to ask for your prediction.
Well, just so you know, I'm always biased, and I always got Ohio State by line, and that's just you're like, we're gonna go out and we're gonna kill them. Now, I will say this though, before me and Chim recorded our show earlier this week, we kind of, we kind of talked, how we talk before we start the show, right? We kind of looking at stats, and we both had started watching the Michigan game, and we're looking at all Iowa's numbers, and I say, Chim, hey, how we beat these guys? Better good at everything. How do we win? So I would have to give you guys your respect on that, but I'm just biased. I think I picked it like, I don't know, like 31-17, something like that. Because that's just me. That's just me. I picked it.
Here's what I think. Indiana having a bye helped them immensely. Anytime you have 2 weeks to prepare for a team, I do think that provides an advantage for the team coming off a bye. I've always believed that in coaching. Some don't. But I've always felt that if I have 2 weeks to prepare for a team, I'm going to know all I want to know about a defense or an offense because I have 2 weeks. When you have just a week, you can't change a lot. And yes, I'm biased as well, being an Indiana boy.
There you go.
They trip up the Buckeyes for once in a blue moon, and why don't you guys just let us have our due?
I think
Indiana for 20 years. Let's give Indiana a shot.
You wouldn't want it that way, Coach. Coach, you wouldn't want it that way.
But I think they're full. They've already what is the record? 10-0 at this point. 10-0. That's the best record. This is the best start to any Indiana season. I think I think they're full. I think they're on the bye week right now, eating crab legs and steak. And
you don't know Cignetti.
I don't know. Hey, Cignetti might be eating good too right now. I think they're gonna come into this game full, and the Buckeyes are still a little bit more hungry than Indiana.
Well, I'll say this: Cignetti's more like the guy you played for, Tress. So take that for whatever you want. Tress, let you guys have steak and crab legs on the off week? Probably not.
The off week after beating Michigan, man. That's when that was.
Right. That was bowl preparation.
Yeah, right. Because we appreciate your time. We appreciate your time. Coach, once again, Coach Griffith, Shannon Griffith of the Hoosiers football tailgate. You can catch him there, giving his breakdown on Indiana football. You also can catch him on 1380 The Fan. He does a little high school football this week. He's a football guy all around, man. We really appreciate your time and you joining us. And before we end the show, this is how we always end our show. We're not just doing this for you, just so you know. But we always end our show with a nice,
I know.
Come on.
I don't know what that spells, but I know there's a line in there. I'll give it to you. OHIO.
There we go.
We appreciate it, Coach.
See, you're full too. You're full as well.
Literally full. All right, fellas. Good luck to you guys. Appreciate it. And you guys do a great job. I have always tuned you in because I always want to know what the Buckeyes are doing.
We appreciate it. We appreciate it.
All right, partners.
We'll talk with you soon.
All right.